After an epic 6-hour flight delay made me miss my cruise ship in Fort Lauderdale, 4 fellow passengers and I worked together to meet the ship 3 days later in St. Thomas. In the process, we racked up thousands of dollars in hotel and flight expenses and forfeited thousands more in cruise fare. How much of that did we get back from our travel insurance policies? And how well did the cruise line's travel insurance perform against other options? I'll answer those questions and more in this episode of The Chill Cruiser, where I'll share the 13 lessons we learned about travel insurance and flight delay compensation. Hey cruisers, Andrew from Ottawa, Canada here. Welcome to The Chill Cruiser, where I review premium cruise ships from a chill perspective, sharing tips on how to save time, money, and grief on your cruise vacations. This is part 2 in a series exploring the many lessons I learned after missing my cruise ship earlier this year in Fort Lauderdale. In part 1, I focused on travel planning. Today I'll dive into what my new friends and I learned about travel insurance and flight delay compensation after we got home and filed our claims. The short answer is a lot. I'm going to share 13 lessons, and some of them were very surprising. If you missed part 1, you can catch up by clicking on the link in the description, or in the top right corner if your device supports YouTube's cards feature. For returning viewers, here's the 15-second recap. My 3-hour flight to Fort Lauderdale turned into a 9-hour nightmare, and I missed my cruise by 45 minutes. I regrouped with 4 of the 12 other passengers on the same plane who also missed the cruise, and we worked together to make our way to St. Thomas to meet the ship. In the process, we became friends and discovered a wonderful hotel in St. Thomas called the Maffely that ended up being the highlight of the entire trip. By the time we finally boarded the ship 3 days later, we'd collectively spent more than 6,500 Canadian dollars on airfare, taxes, hotels, and meals. By missing more than 3 days of the cruise, we'd also forfeited several thousands more in cruise fare, bringing the total cost for the 5 of us to more than $10,000. Between us, we'd purchased 4 different types of travel insurance, 2 of which were sold by Princess. I'll tell you right now, none of the policies covered all of the expenses or unused cruise fare. None of them came even close, but one policy did cover a lot more than the rest. Before I dive into insurance, I'll cover what compensation we did or didn't receive from the airline and the cruise line, starting with Air Canada. Our plane was delayed 6 hours, mainly because it took 4 hours to get Air Canada's maintenance team to investigate something on the wing after we pushed back from the gate in Toronto. Pearson Airport had no free gates, and Air Canada's maintenance team wasn't comfortable coming to an aircraft parking lot to take a look. Once we finally did get back to a gate and maintenance arrived, the issue was resolved in a few minutes with the twist of a rag. After a quick scan of Canada's air travel regulations, I was convinced that Air Canada was going to have to compensate each passenger $500. The delay was related to maintenance that was within their control, and it exceeded 3 hours, but that ended up being very naive of me. Shortly after filing my claim, I got this terse email from Air Canada saying that because the delay was related to safety, my compensation claim was denied. So after 6 hours of delays, 4 of those hours trapped on a jet with no option to return to the terminal, Air Canada and by extension Pearson was allowed to give the hundreds of passengers who missed their cruise ship a big fat zero because of a big fat loophole in Canada's airline-friendly passenger rights regulations. It should be illegal for airports and airlines to trap passengers on the tarmac for more than 3 hours. Oh wait, it is, but you won't be surprised to know that there's a loophole for that too. So that was lesson 1, don't expect any compensation from Canadian Airlines, no matter how long the delay or the reason. 2 of my new friends had booked their flights through the flight booking program of the cruise line called Princess EZAir, which is supposed to help you meet the ship if you miss it because of flight delays. When they called EZAir after missing the ship, the representative wasn't very helpful and said they would need to spend an entire day backtracking north to Dallas and then connect to St. Thomas, even when there were direct flights available from Fort Lauderdale. My friends got the impression that they could just get reimbursed for booking their own flight and hotel, which didn't end up being the case. So that was lessons 2 and 3. If you book through EZAir, ensure they make all the arrangements to meet the ship. And be warned, they will send you there via the cheapest route, even if that means multiple flights and backtracking 1,200 miles to a major hub. Moving on to the cruise line. During our flight delay, we had notified Princess Cruises' en route hotline that at least 12 passengers on our plane were trying to make the same ship, and they said get to the port as soon as possible. I thought there was a slight chance the ship would wait because on the 2 previous times I was on the same ship in the same port, it had waited close to an hour for fewer passengers than were on our plane trying to get to the ship. When we arrived 45 minutes after the scheduled departure time, the ship was long gone and the port was deserted with no people, signs, or any communication with instructions on what to do, which didn't feel very good. Between the 5 of us alone, we had taken 44 Princess cruises and sailed 372 days, or the equivalent of just over a year on their ships. 3 of us were in the top 2 tiers of their loyalty program. When we checked in at the pier in St. Thomas, the crew took our passports, handed us our medallions, and acted like nothing had happened. So we were a little surprised, and it was very bittersweet when we finally boarded the ship. One of my new friends in the highest tier of Princess's loyalty program shared our experience with management, and that's when things started getting a little better. The guest services manager did meet with us and showed empathy for our experience, and by the end of the cruise had given each of us around $250 in onboard credit as a goodwill gesture, which was a start. That was lesson 4. Escalating concerns to ship management did improve our experience slightly. When we asked about getting our unused cruise fare back, which was equivalent to more than $1,000 each for some of us, she said we would need to deal with shoreside guest relations after the cruise. And a few days after we disembarked, Princess did call and said they would not issue prorated refunds, but that they would refund the unused portion of purchased add-ons like Princess Plus, which is their all-inclusive package. She made it sound like they only refund unused cruise fare for guests who purchase the insurance provided by Princess. I found this interesting for 2 reasons. One is that if you look on the Princess website, they have travel guidelines for each port. Their recommendation for flying into Fort Lauderdale on an international flight is to arrive no later than, wait for it, 2 hours prior to the ship's departure. Before this trip, I took a risk flying in the day of the cruise, but even I would never dare cut it that close. Our flight was scheduled to arrive 6 hours before the ship's departure, or close to 3 times greater than the guideline. The second reason I found Princess's rationale for not refunding unused cruise fare interesting is that their optional travel insurance policy, which is called Princess Travel Protection, doesn't cover unused cruise fare due to travel delays, only if you miss the cruise for medical reasons or death. So that was lessons 5 and 6. Plan to fly in much earlier than the guidelines provided by Princess, in most cases at least the day before. And if you miss the ship, don't expect the cruise line to refund unused cruise fare, even if you're scheduled to fly in well before their travel guidelines. Okay, so aside from a few $100s in onboard credit, we had barely made a dent covering the thousands of dollars in expenses and forfeited cruise fare. It was time to put our travel insurance policies to the test. Between the 5 of us, we had purchased 4 different types of insurance. Princess's Travel Protection, the same-day late arrival protection provided by Princess's EZAir program, trip delay and interruption insurance coverage included in the RBC WestJet World Elite MasterCard, and Deluxe single-trip travel insurance also from RBC Royal Bank. On average, we each spent around $700 Canadian in hotels and meals over the 3 days waiting to meet the ship, as well as $650 in airfare. We had also forfeited an average of $750 in cruise fare. The grand total average cost was $2,100 each. So essentially, we got half a cruise for the price of 2. Before I go into specifics, I should say that my goal with this video is to share our experience only and that I'm not trying to provide travel insurance advice or recommendations. Okay, with that little disclaimer out of the way, let's start with the Princess Protection Package, which costs 12% of your cruise fare, or around $120 in this case. The package offers coverage in multiple areas, but for the expenses incurred in our situation, it only covers $500 in hotels and airfare expenses pre-cruise, and doesn't offer unused cruise fare due to travel delays. This policy left a balance of $1,650 to be paid out of pocket. If you factor in the onboard credit, the balance is $1,400. Moving on to the Princess EZAir program, which includes what they call same-day late arrival protection. I mentioned earlier that my friends with this coverage called the EZAir team after missing the ship and got the impression that they could book their own travel and get reimbursed. That didn't end up being the case, so they only ended up receiving $500 towards expenses and a $300 future cruise credit per person. So this policy also left a balance of $1,650 to be paid out of pocket, or again, $1,400 with the onboard credit. We are not doing well so far. Let's move on to the other 2 policies in the group, which were coincidentally both offered by the Canadian bank RBC. I'll start with the RBC WestJet World Elite MasterCard. The cost is included in the card's $119 annual fee. It covered $500 in hotel expenses and 100% of the flight, but once again did not cover unused cruise fare due to travel delays, leaving $950 to be paid out of pocket. The onboard credit and Princess Plus refund brought this balance down to a much more manageable $450. After looking closely at these 3 policies, we had learned lessons 7 and 8. Most options, including those offered by Princess, don't cover unused cruise fare due to travel delays, and when selecting your travel insurance policy, make sure it includes generous allowances for all three categories: air, hotel, and unused fare. Last is the RBC Deluxe package, which was the most expensive policy at more than $200, but on paper offers the most coverage. But it takes up a lot of paper. The certificate of insurance spans 43 pages, and it took me half an hour to understand exactly what coverage applied in this situation. But since coverage can vary so significantly, it's worth the investment in time. That was lesson 9. Decode your insurance policy before buying and traveling so you're crystal clear on what's covered. Unfortunately, I don't have a definitive outcome to report on this policy. The first claim was denied for no clear reason, and there's still a back and forth underway many months later to review the claim. It seems the more comprehensive the coverage, the harder it is to make a claim. This is a good time to talk about travel agents. The RBC Deluxe policy was purchased as part of a flight and cruise package booked by a travel agent. When that agent was contacted during the most stressful part of our ordeal for help understanding what's covered and how to claim, they basically said, "You're on your own and do it yourself." I was shocked, since I thought that's why you engage a travel agent in the first place, to provide that full service support. So that was lesson 10. If you use a travel agent, make sure they take the time to help you understand the policy options before you pick one, and confirm that they'll support you through the entire insurance claim process. That's key, because we learned that there are a few parts of the process that are easy to get wrong and can derail the outcome of your claim. For all of our policies, the claim submission process was online, through the insurance companies that underwrite the policies. So for Princess, it's Aon, and for the RBC products, it's Alliance Insurance. But it's not as simple as just filing one claim. Because there are several categories of coverage like trip interruption and trip delay, you have to file separate claims for each category. There was a lengthy list of categories to choose from, so it's important you select the exact categories in your policy. We think one of the reasons the RBC Deluxe claim was denied was because the category in the claim didn't match the policy. So that was lessons 11 and 12. Be prepared to submit multiple claims and make sure the categories you choose match exactly with the category in your policy's certificate of insurance, or it could result in the claim being denied when you're actually eligible for coverage. You'll need to upload a lot of documents, starting with copies of your flight and cruise reservations, hotel invoices, and credit card statements. For confirmation of the flight delay, we PDF'd the last delay notification email from Air Canada, which seemed to work well. That was lesson 13. Keep absolutely every email and receipt you received during your flight delay and your journey to meet the ship, because some email services will permanently delete emails you put in the trash as soon as a week later. I managed to file most of the emails I needed into a folder, which came in handy later. Once the claims were submitted, in all cases except for RBC Deluxe, checks arrived within a few weeks, which was one of the few pleasant surprises. So that's where we stand today. Of the 4 policies, the cheapest one that's included with the premium credit card covered the most expenses, which was very surprising. Had the folks at EZAir been clearer on the process, the friends who booked through them would theoretically have had the least out-of-pocket costs. The most expensive policy with the best coverage, as we can decode it on paper, denied the first claim, so has paid 0 to date, and we're still waiting for clear answers on whether that will change. When there is news to report on this claim, I'll post a pinned update in the comments. That leaves our total out-of-pocket balance at around $6,000, meaning insurance and compensation has covered less than half of the total cost. All in all, it would be an understatement to say that we're disappointed with close to every aspect of how our experience was handled, from Air Canada to Princess to the coverage and experience of our policies. Not to mention the travel agent who should have made a stressful experience a little easier for my friend who purchased through them. In response to part 1, a lot of folks commented that they prefer to fly in the day before the cruise. That's definitely a lesson we've learned. But it also prompts the question, why does Princess still even allow customers to book same-day flights on EZAir like they did for my 2 friends, who they basically left high and dry? And why does Princess have unrealistic flight guidelines like arriving 2 hours before the ship's departure at a time when airlines and airports are such a mess? That's just setting the stage for more people to go through a very stressful and costly situation like we did. I flagged those unrealistic flight guidelines to Princess on July 28th and asked them to reconsider their decision to not refund our unused cruise fare. As of the day I posted this video, I have yet to receive a response, and the guidelines are still up there, unchanged. As loyal Princess cruisers who have sailed the equivalent of a year on their ships, this is the part that stings the most. If they don't refund your unused cruise fare when you purchase their insurance product, and they don't give it back when you follow their flight guidelines, how are you supposed to get that money back? If they do end up getting back to me, I'll post a pinned update in the comments. On a lighter note, I'm about to cruise to Bermuda, which is one of the most chill-friendly itineraries out there. And you won't be surprised to learn that I'm sailing on another cruise line. Stay tuned for a chill perspective on that experience very soon. If you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss a beat. If you missed part 1 detailing all of our travel planning lessons learned, you can check that out here. Thank you for watching and happy cruising.